Thank you, everybody, for coming to this public hearing for the town of Preble on September 25th, 2017. This is concerning a proposed local law number A for the year 2017, a local law to amend the zoning ordinance of the town of Preble to add new provisions regulating solar energy systems in the town. This is the public hearing pertaining to this text that was on the internet on our website that anybody that was interested could print out and review and ask questions tonight, make comments. And at our last board meeting, because we thought it was prudent, we decided to enact a moratorium on this law. So we have notice hereby given that there has been presented to the town board of the town of Preble on September 11th, proposed local law number B 2017, imposing a 6-month moratorium on freestanding solar panel installations within the town of Preble. Proposed law B 2017 has been introduced and will be considered for enactment pursuant to the provisions of the municipal home rule law. The full text of the said law is on file at the town of Preble Town Hall for inspection for all interested parties, and it's also on our website. Notice is further given that September 11, 2017, the town board determined that the proposed local law is a type 2 action and thus will have no significant adverse impact on the environment. Notice is therefore is further given the town board will hold a public hearing to consider the proposed local law at the said town hall on October 9th at 7 p.m. as soon as thereafter as the matter can be heard, at which time all persons interested will be heard. So we're having another public hearing on October 9th. So we have two things going on. We have local law A and we have local law B. We can discuss both of them tonight, but we're more concerned with the text of local law A. So does anybody have any comments or questions? Oh, yeah. Since we're on TV and this is going to be recorded for eternal posterity, you can come up here and stand over, I guess, right in this area here. The camera will be pointed on you. If you're camera shy, you can stay where you are and we can still maybe hear you. It depends on how you are. Anybody?
Oh, I might say something. I know you're
A little camera shy too, are you?
Good evening, everyone. Generally, I urge the board not to approve the solar law with its current provisions. I think it's too restrictive, and I'll turn to some of those details in a moment. And I think the moratorium, which would give us time as a community to understand what the concerns are and see if there's a less restrictive way to address those, would be better. To me, when we're talking about alternative energy, the elephant in the room is climate change. How many of us remember the 25th of September being close to 90 degrees? It's just the latest example of problem after problem that's going on with the climate change and the extreme weather, the wildfires, the hurricanes. And 98% of the world scientists agree that the burning of fossil fuels is the primary cause for that. And so I think history will judge us on how we react in this current period. Are we going to join and be thought of as Nero and fiddle while the earth burns, or are we going to do everything we can to reduce the use of fossil fuels? I think that's really where we are. Most of you may know that I've spent a lot of time on these issues. I'm a strong supporter of alternative energy. We have solar panels on our house, which would be illegal under this law. We have geothermal heat and cooling on the newest wing. We have an air source heat pump that we just installed on the old wing. We don't burn any fossil fuels for heating or cooling. And we buy what electricity we don't generate from a company that uses renewable resources. I've worked the last 2 years with the Solarize movement. Last spring, we had a very well-attended workshop down in Cortland with hundreds of people interested in how they could learn more about solar panels and the benefits coming from them. We've hosted 3 solar tours at our house. We've received a lot of compliments about how our panels look and fit in. Got to park out back tonight because it's busy and look at the solar panels on our town hall, which we all should be proud of. So what I think should be looked at in this law is the complete ban on solar farms. That's something that we really ought to take a harder look at. First of all, there are different sizes and types of solar farms. I think Torky may have some comments about that. And well, let me back up. I've seen there is at least one very predatory company that's trying to lease. It was about a year ago. I think it's called Crystal Creek. And it takes the concept of a good idea, a solar lease that would really benefit farmers, financially and otherwise, and makes it bad because it's the terms of it are so bad for the landowners that it's not a good lease. But that doesn't mean that a solar lease or all solar farms are bad. And if anyone knows of somebody who's looking at a solar lease, I have found a lawyer in Syracuse who could help them. But when you see the kind of money that a farmer could generate from a relatively small solar farm, particularly given the financial hardships that many of our farms are facing, I think we should take a hard look at that ban. It also bans ground-mounted panels in residential Lakeside 1 zone. I don't quite understand that one. And it bans ground-mounted panels in any front yard. So I think those are the things that jumped out at me when I reviewed the law. So I think that I think this is a very important issue for our town. I wish we could go back and revisit the sustainability plan that people work so hard on and see if that should not also be revisited in this, if we get a 6 months moratorium. But if we had 6 months, we could schedule some workshops. We've met with the people that run Solarize. They're very willing to come down and talk to us about solar and answer questions. We could bring in other folks. We could have a community discussion about this issue. And so that's why I think a moratorium is much more advisable. If we have a moratorium, we don't have any immediate threat. I think we all understand that. So those are my substantive and big picture concerns. I also feel compelled to just say a little bit administratively about how we got here tonight. And I would suggest we could make better use of the town's website. I mentioned to our supervisor yesterday that this hearing and the law were not on the website, and quickly it was fixed. Thank you. But the point is, this law was unveiled in mid-August, and yet a citizen wouldn't know that from the website. And so I just think that particularly when we have a public hearing or a law of this significance, we ought to get it up on the website and talk about it as much as possible. That would be my suggestion. We just learned when the moratorium was. How would we get a copy of the moratorium provision? That's not on the website either, I don't think. And the other suggestion I would have is that I know for county legislatures, some laws of a certain significance or magnitude have, for lack of a better term, incubation periods. 10 days, this kind of a law, I would suggest, ought to be distributed to all board members and all of the public before it comes in before this board for any kind of major decision consideration. I just think that would be a lot more democratic. So I would ask you to seriously consider setting this law aside, enacting the moratorium, and opening up a broader public and community discussion. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Joe. Usually the purpose of a public hearing is just for the board to receive input from the public, comments and questions. But in our case, we are a small town, and there is a certain amount of intimacy in our town, and we are willing to, I think, have a discussion, right, from the board to the public and back and forth. So I just want to make a comment that the way all this got started was Rick Fritz, our zoning enforcement fellow. He came to me and he says, Jim, he says, there's solar and wind salesmen running around the town talking to the big landowners, trying to get them to put up solar farms. And he said, you should probably take a look at this. The board should probably take a look at this issue before a big solar farm goes up and the board doesn't even really know about it yet. So the board would really have to know about it, but things could start moving quickly. And I said to Rick, we would take a look at this, and we would do what we can to look at our zoning ordinance, and we would also make that compatible with our long-term planning plan and comprehensive plan for the town, to see if it's in coordination with it. And we would try to do something. And he was thinking that we should work quickly on this. If the town wants to keep its rural character and doesn't want windmills on top of the hills around here and solar farms on the farmland in the valleys or on the hillsides. So that's how all this came about. And so the board felt that we should look into this and start a process and a dialogue about what to do about the situation. And then Al took it on upon himself, Al Socia, to spearhead this project and sit in the meetings with legal counsel to try to get some wording to make this acceptable to everybody involved, the landowners and also the town itself, according to the comprehensive plan. Al, do you have anything to say?
No, to begin with, I use the comprehensive plan as my guiding document because that's what everyone says they want Preble to be. So using that and getting inputs from different people and our board members, we staffed the committee with people from the town board, the planning board, ZBA, and we had Dan Deneen. I had Dan Deneen here from county planning. I had a municipal attorney. That's all they do is municipal law from Syracuse. So he crafted this with our inputs. He crafted this law that's very similar to other towns. And it was suggested that we wanted to strictly limit large commercial power solar farms because if you start putting them up, they'll start ruining the character of the area. I understand the financial aspects of it, but Tully's got a 4 megawatt system up on North Road. You can't see it. You're going to see most of what's here. I know Tully's planning a couple other ones, but they're planning them so that you don't see them from the ground. There's only one spot that I saw that you could see the one that's there now, and that's from on top of Song Mountain, because they had all kinds of planning went in, and they didn't want to screw up their landscapes. They wanted the scenic character of the town, and so using the comprehensive plan, that's what our guide was. We were trying to do the same thing.
So we're open to input from the public to revise this and to shape it in a way that serves everybody. We're not against landowners making money in this capacity, but it has to be something that's acceptable to most people in the town and according to our comprehensive plan. So anyway, anybody else with questions or comments? Dan?
Well, I can't speak as well as Joe, but I think that the proposed law, from what I heard at the last meeting that I came to, is entirely too restrictive. I remember the figure of 15 kilowatts. I don't know where you came up with that.
Well,
But my house has 20 kilowatts of electric heat. That's
So we
not
can-
counting the stove or the water heater or the dryer. So you don't stay here in the winter. You don't have to worry about heat.
I
I
do,
know your house had electric heat in it when I went and fixed it 40 years ago.
no,
Old
I
Mr.
do,
Hudson.
I do heat the house all winter long.
Also,
But, you know, those were numbers that was in one of the laws. That could easily be bumped up.
Also, the electric company will not let you put in more than what they figure you need.
Right.
You have made no provision for somebody to put in a greenhouse or heat their swimming pool. We might have to do that because of the blue-green algae and the lake can't swim there anymore. So I think it's just way too restrictive on the individual. And then as far as businesses go, people are growing corn to make oil. Now, that's very inefficient compared to using solar. So what if you block off some farmland to have solar cells on the land you would have grown corn on that was going to be made into alcohol?
Well, if that's the
I
case,
just think it's way too restricted. You ought to ban the whole thing. I'm pretty upset about this. I guess you can tell. Maybe I should keep my mouth shut since I'm on the zoning board. I shouldn't have an opinion about anything, but that's my opinion.
Thanks, Dan. Anybody else? Maria?
I do a lot with renewable energy, and what's most interesting is that this town hall is an absolute model for the rest of the whole state. It is always used when they're looking at what municipalities are doing. They use this as a model. We wouldn't have thought of this a decade ago. But when it came about and we were able to get the funding for it, we did this. It is a model. I give Al a great deal of credit and everybody else and the zoning. When I go around, I hear people say, well, don't go to Preble. It's very difficult to deal with those guys. They don't want any industrial building in Preble. And I mean, this is a two-edged sword, but I really appreciate that because, you know, we don't want some of the stuff that they've been wanting to put in, like the propane tanks. However, we can't live under a rock. Now, Joe and I have disagreed in the past about certain things. But this, in the press. This board were very concerned about the hydrofracking and about natural gas and what this might do to the area. We don't live under a rock. Where are we going to get our electricity from? It's going to be natural gas. I thought we went through this before. What's very important is siting, and you had it exactly right. If it is put in a spot where we can look at it, we don't see it. That's how the Fenner Wind Farm, they wanted it in a whole different area, and the town supervisor worked for 3 years to get it sited so that everyone was satisfied. And the farmers, who at first were against it, were extremely pleased because they really get a lot of the resources for themselves, and they're able to keep the character of the town. I didn't have a chance. I suppose I've been busy this summer, and I didn't know this was coming up, and I didn't have a chance to really look into this. And siting is going to be extremely important. I'd like a moratorium so we can study it. My husband and I have this rule that we never make decisions unless we really study it and then come back to it. Sometimes we lose out on things, but that's okay. You really have to study something of this sort. I think the siting is extremely important. I think having people who have already used the solar put into the position where they say, oh my God, I'm going to be illegal. We've thought of putting solar panels up. Why? Because of the electricity bill. It isn't fair to the people if they can't utilize certain provisions that we could use, like solar. I'd like to study it more. It's kind of thrown on me. Maybe I was busy this summer and I didn't know this was coming up. I think we should study it, but we have to realize that we don't want our nuclear. It's 30%. 30% of our electricity comes from nuclear right now in this state. We don't like coal. We're down to about 10 or 9% for the state using coal. We don't want the natural gas. That's going up. It's like 35% now. If we get rid of all those things, where are we going to get our electricity from? It has to be renewable energy. It has to be your solar and your wind and your geothermal. We have to look into those. I absolutely agree that I don't want to look across and see the big solar. I'd rather not. Lord knows what they're going to put across for me. But however, solar probably would be better. However, siting is extremely important. Everyone should be comfortable with it. But we need the renewable energy sources if we're not going to go into really, really other dirty ways. Global warming, the climate, the world is really local. We see it here, what we've done, and I hope that our town will look into it really thoroughly and have a moratorium on that.
Thanks, Rhea. Anybody else? Tarky?
Well, I didn't want to repeat what he said, and so I was making some notes, and then I got an email from Chris Carrick, and Chris is we had been talking with him about this. He's with the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board, and he's the Energy Program Manager. So he asked if I would read this note that he sent. So I've made copies. There should be a copy for each of you there. I might skip around a little bit because it's kind of long, but
It's okay. We have all evening.
all right. So he has worked a lot with municipalities in developing laws, and I have to say this: when I was reading this, it made me realize, technology, lingo, and practices change fast, and so maybe that's where we are. We're kind of in the middle of something, where one municipal lawyer was using kind of old language. So that could be something that we're facing here. But he starts out, as a public agency representing the 5 counties, the Central New York's Regional Planning and Development Board works with municipalities, businesses, and residents to increase access to local clean energy, such as solar PV. Through our Solarize Central New York initiative, we have helped over 300 homeowners to install more than 3 megawatts of solar over the last several years. Overall, solar PV has increased in Central New York more than 12-fold from 2011 to 2016. This rapid growth in solar is an important step forward toward meeting the overall targets established for Central New York in the Vision CNY Regional Sustainability Plan that our agency published with support from NYSERDA in 2013. Our plan called for increasing the amount of electricity generated by renewable sources within the region more than 10-fold to meet 25% of the region's consumption by 2030. I'm going to skip number 3 and read paragraph 4. In addition to our Solarize Central New York campaign, our agency is working with municipalities to increase the use of solar. To date, we have helped about half of the region's 150 municipalities to adopt the New York State's Unified Solar Permit, a combined building and electrical permit for solar PV systems, 25 kilowatts or less. We are currently helping more than 20 county, city, town, and village governments to install solar in their own facilities. And we have developed a model solar zoning law to balance the needs to protect community resources with the growth of the solar industry. Local governments are concerned about the strong interest of solar developers to build ground-mounted arrays in their communities. And this concern is understandable, given the lack of zoning laws for this kind of development. However, as local governments attempt to develop their own laws for solar, it is important to note several factors which will limit or slow the pace and scale of solar development throughout the state. First, the term solar farm. It's often misunderstood, particularly if it's interpreted to refer only to large arrays that are typically seen in other states. To date, there has only been one such installation in New York, the 32 megawatt Long Island solar farm in Brookhaven National Laboratory in Upton. In contrast, there is great interest across the state in the concept of solar gardens, which have been enabled by the state's community solar policy. These systems are typically between 200 kilowatts and 2 megawatts and are designed to provide neighborhood homes and businesses with clean, affordable, locally generated power. Such systems can require as little as 1 acre or up to 10 or 12 acres. Second, and it's important to note, the amount and size of the new solar PV arrays that will be developed in any particular community, like Preble, will be limited to a great extent by the utility infrastructure that already exists in that community. It can be cost prohibitive in many locations to connect a solar PV array to the utility distribution grid. And this is likely to be the case throughout Preble, based on the utility maps. And then he has a specific example, but maps are something we can also look at to document that. Third and finally, municipalities and citizens should recognize that solar PV arrays, if properly scaled, do not necessarily result in significant community impact. Setting aside visual and aesthetic concerns, which can be directly addressed through proper setbacks and screening requirements, which can be done through zoning laws. So skipping to paragraph 9. We are concerned that by prohibiting most forms of ground-mounted solar arrays, particularly solar gardens, and systems that provide for remote net metering, the town has closed an important opportunity for the community's residents and businesses to increase their energy independence and reduce their carbon footprint, as the town hall itself has done here. The town is to be commended for setting an example by using solar energy to reduce the impact of its own operations, and we encourage the town board to provide its constituents with the same choice. Not everyone who wants to go solar can install panels on their own property, whether that is because they rent, or because the roof is in poor condition, or does not have a good southern exposure. Community solar gardens expand the opportunity for every New Yorker to go solar, and it's up to each local government to allow that choice. As such, we recommend that the town enact a temporary 6-month moratorium so that it's proposed, which you've done, I think, or proposed it at least, yeah, okay. As its proposed solar zoning law can be modified to provide the maximum opportunity for everyone in Preble while still protecting important agricultural lands and other resources. We are happy to provide whatever assistance we can to help the town as it moves forward. Respectfully, Chris Carrick, Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board, Energy Program Manager. I'll give up my own comments.
Well, I know Chris. I've been to a breakfast meeting with him, and he was also involved. Well, the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board was involved with our project here, and they funded part of it. And I just have to tell everybody that one of the reasons why we did do that, we put solar panels on the top here, we insulated the building thoroughly, and we replaced the windows, was because we did receive the entire project of doing all those 3 things cost about $140,000. And we did receive subsidies of $70,000 from Central New York Regional Development Board, Chris Carrick, and also from James Seward. He gave us some money too. So we did receive subsidies for that. If we didn't get any subsidies at all, we probably wouldn't have done it, or it would have been a lot more difficult for us to do that. And the payback would not be anywhere near what it is. I think the payback's about eight or 9 years for us on this project. which is acceptable. Given that the lifespan of a solar panel is about 20 years. That was what they told us when they installed it. So that's some background on that. Anybody else with comments? Yes?
Hi, I'm Terry Orr, and a couple of things. The first off, I guess I would say that I think the law is overly restrictive. I think the prohibition on the commercial scale ground mounted is a little over the top, to be honest. The 15 kilowatt or less for rooftop mounted, in particular rooftop and building mounted, I would recommend that that just be scratched because I think the building itself and the rooftop area and the technology is going to limit what you can put on that building. If you've got a larger building and you want to put more kilowatts on there and throw off whatever you're not using, then if the primary concern is aesthetics, it should be a non-issue. So I would recommend that the 15 kilowatt just be scratched, because you're also going to find that the technology is changing so rapidly that different panels are going to be more efficient. If somebody can put a rooftop full of panels and be able to produce 16, 20, 25 megawatts, and you know, as this gentleman said, some houses are using more. I've got a 16 kilowatt backup generator on my house. So the 15 kilowatt, I think, is kind of an arbitrary number that probably doesn't work. In terms of the prohibition on the commercial scale, I have a little bit of experience in this arena, having worked for an environmental consulting firm for a number of years that has been doing a lot of work with commercial developers in New York State. I'm retired now. I don't have a dog in the fight, so I'm just kind of throwing this out in terms of information. But for a commercial developer to look at a project in New York State, they're probably not going to come in for much more than 2 megawatts. 2 to 3 megawatts is kind of the sweet spot where some of these developers are looking for projects in New York State. And they're looking for 10 to 15 acres of land. Now, of that 10 or 15 acres of land, some of that is going to drop out because of wetland issues and so forth. But you're not looking at somebody coming in and saying that they want to put 100 acres of solar in Preble. If you're trying to prohibit that large scale, 30 or 40 megawatt project that's going to take up 100 acres or 200 acres, this prohibition isn't going to stop it anyway, because anything over 25 megawatts by state law has to go through an Article 10 process, which is a state process. The town will have some say in that, but it'll be advisory. They'll go right over your head if somebody wants to come in and put, a huge scale project in here. So you're really looking at the smaller scale, as Tarky mentioned, the garden, as opposed to the solar farm. And 10 acres of land for someone that has 100 acres or 200 or 300 acre farm and has a small portion of that isn't, they may have a small field that isn't producing, or that they want to take out of production, that is out of the way. It's a way that, the farm owner can earn some money that they can depend on, that they're not weather dependent, they're not depending on kind of the whims of others. I think there's also some economic benefits that a lot of the developers will bring into the town, post community agreements. My understanding is, I never was involved with the financial end of it. It was always on the environmental permitting. But my understanding is that once the solar panels are installed, then the town taxes the developer based on the value of that infrastructure that goes in. It's no longer just taxed at ag land prices. You've now got higher tax revenue that's coming into the town. Some of the developers are also bringing in incentives. You know, is there something that the town needs? Do they have to improve access roads, those types of things? So my suggestion, instead of a prohibition, would be to somehow incorporate a restriction on the percentage of land that a landowner could put into production of solar. If somebody has 200-acre farm, and they want to put 10% of that in, 20 acres, you know, they should be able to do that, in my opinion. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things that Rick Fritz brought up too, that it just came to my mind, was land reclamation. So you have a solar project that goes in, and these panels have a lifespan of 20 years. And after the 20 years, the money is made, and the operators of the solar panels don't want to deal with reclamation, with disassembling everything, and taking care of the land, planting grass again the way it was. He was very concerned about these structures just being left there for the landowner to deal with. And the landowner isn't going to take money out of his pocket to deal with it. So, who deals with it? Maybe it defaults to the town to eventually deal with. So that, of course, has to be written into these contracts, land reclamation. But he was concerned very much about that issue. And if you have a 20-year project and technology leapfrogs over solar and wind to something else, and then nobody's interested in this anymore. And so what happens then? I mean, there's all these questions to ask. 20 years is a long time, given the fact that the world is changing so fast. Terry?
Yeah, Jim, I can kind of speak to that
Okay.
a little bit. The way these ground-mounted panels are installed, it's a steel racking system that is basically pounded into the ground 3 or 4 feet. There's very little in the way of foundation. There's not a lot of concrete poured. There may be a pad for an inverter or some of the structures, but usually that's something that might be the size of a shed, 10 by 15 type of a concrete pad. But for the most part, you're talking about pounding steel into the ground. At the end of 20 years, everything is recyclable. The steel yanked out of the ground, panels can be recycled. And the cost of the recycling pays for itself for the most part. Most of the leases that I've seen have that written into the landowner lease, that either the landowner will accept the income from the scrap. So there's an incentive for them to remove and scrap the steel at that point in time, or it's written in that the developer has to do it. I've seen some places where the towns have required some sort of an escrow account that's set aside for a decommissioning fund, if you will. But at the end of 20 years, pull those stakes up and you're back to where you are now, because for solar, there's very little earthwork that has to be done. Most of these solar fields will follow the contours, the contours of the existing land. It's not like wind where you have to flatten out a pad for a large foundation structure. So the decommissioning is, in my experience, has not been an issue. It's something to be concerned about, talk about ahead of time, write it into your laws.
Right.
But the reality is, at the end of 20 years, this gets picked up, everything gets recycled, and the farmer has his field back.
Okay, thanks, Terry.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Yes.
My name is Mike Roach, and I want to, first of all, thank the board for this opportunity to comment on solar. And my limited information on this comes from the article, it's Nick's article that I saw in the Cortland paper a while back. And I do have some background myself in the solar industry. And one of the first takeaways from reading the article, well, first of all, I understand what the town is trying to do. And it looked like the intention was to preserve the ability for private residential homeowners, business owners to have their solar, but to prohibit the large commercial solar farm that is more of an investment grade asset, and that energy, instead of going into our meters here, running our lights locally, that energy is put into the transmission grid and likely ends up going to New York City or somewhere else, and we don't get any local benefit of it here. But my thought from reading the article was that there's a third category of project that is getting caught up in this prohibition. And it is what Atarki had referred to in Chris Carrick's letter, is the solar garden or solar farm. And that's kind of in between the small private or small commercial array and the large investment grade asset that is putting power on the transmission grid. And New York State, just about 2 years ago, October of 2014, they passed legislation allowing for these community solar farms or solar gardens. And what that does, different than that investor product who's sending it to New York City, these community solar farms allow a bunch of us to get together. And because I don't have solar on my roof, I'm in the solar industry and I don't have solar on my roof. Why? Because my neighbor to the south has 80 or 90 foot beautiful oak trees, a line of them that are on the property boundary that are theirs. Well, I love those trees. I wouldn't want to see those trees gone. So by default, my house is in the shade all the time. So I would be a good solar candidate. And the state was responding to a little bit of an outcry that said, okay, we realize the populace at large, we realize the benefit that can be gained from solar panels. But up until the point before community solar was enabled, it was really only benefited those folks who could put it on their roof, put it on their land. And so that is to say, folks that have some wealth, that own their property, own their farms, and have the land or have the structure to do it. But intentionally, I think what it did was sidelined anyone who was in an apartment building, who was a renter, perhaps on a fixed income, didn't have the capital to put into a project on the front end to reap the benefits. So that was the impetus behind community solar, is it really allowed all of the benefits that are known to be attributed to solar energy to everybody. Not just if you were wealthy enough to own your home, own your land, own your farm. So now I could participate, even though I live in the shade, I could be a member of a community solar project and reap the benefits of solar myself. So and I've likened it to, solar is another way of harvesting the free energy that falls out of the sky, right? Not too much different than, say, a farmer who's growing corn. He's harvesting the free energy that's falling out of the sky. He turns it into corn and turns it into soybeans, turns it into hay. Well, this is another way of harvesting the free energy from the sun. We get a collector under it, and now we're converting it directly into electricity. In the community model, that is not electricity that the investor is using our local land and reaping a benefit by putting that on the grid and sending it to New York City. That is a benefit to all of us locally here who can participate, not put it on our, and maybe you could put it on your own roof, but maybe you don't want to put holes in your roof, or your building faces east and west. Could be a variety of reasons that it might make sense to be able to participate in a community solar array, which of course also benefits from the scale of building one larger array in one location, one set of permitting, one interconnection with the utility, instead of 15 or 20 or 300 individual applications and interconnections. So that was my concern, was that in the article, perhaps unintentionally, that community solar legislation that was enacted 2 years ago was being prohibited, and therefore the residents and members of the community really being locked out of a benefit that adjoining towns residents may enjoy. So I just wanted to bring that to the town's attention. Again, I commend the board for being open to the moratorium approach, where we can all get further educated and make sure that we get it right the first time.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, this is gonna be crazy because after these people, holy cow. Plus, I have to stand out in the hallway in order to be seen.
Wow. They can tilt it up.
Tony, you wanna take me home now? Okay, Bob Cinco, Song Lake Road. And first of all, I do, the town board, you, Jim, I hope y'all know, I think you do a great job. I really do. I mean, I'm not just, Joe doesn't, but I do.
I'm here for it.
Don't get sway back though.
Okay, but one of the first ones, and Joe, just so you know that I was listening to you. A little bit about the administrative part that Joe had touched on. If, I don't know when Joe and Tarky first heard of this, but I'm on Tarky's email list for Song Lake. And if Tarky had heard, she would have gotten, word out. So maybe Tarky kind of has to be at least the main focal point for anything that goes on in the town. Because then I look at it this way. If I didn't hear, if I was Joe and Tarky and I have all this solar, energy built into my house and everything else, an investment, and I didn't hear about this. And then all of a sudden, well, what's somebody going to do? Knock on my door and tell me I got to get rid of the solar panels? I mean, I just doesn't. And that would be one of my questions too, I guess, is why is residential lake, why is it prohibited to have what Tarky and Joe have? I'm just curious. And you don't have to answer that tonight. I think it's a question, though, that it's the only exclusion that I saw from reviewing the stuff. Whether it's, it can't be health and safety. Well, maybe it is if somebody could get electrocuted over solar panels. I don't know. Terry could probably answer everything else. But yeah, so the administrative part, I just think
I'll stand in front of that one.
Okay.
And I'll make sure that when we get things, drafts and whatever, everything gets put on the website.
Yep. Okay.
I'll make-
I know.
People
again,
on Song
Alan,
Lake should
I'm
just
telling
talk to
you.
each other.
Yeah.
I mean, you're all on
And I
Song
know, I saw the
I was gonna
video,
say, I heard
I haven't been
pretty
to
early
many
on.
town hall meetings, but I do keep up with the videos about every third one maybe. And I know at the August 14th meeting that there was a discussion about whether 15 kilowatts was too much or too little. And there was some, back and forth about that.
I think Terry's point is well taken. I think, those are things that can probably come out.
Yep.
Be revised.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the other thing. If we look at this more, right, I always found this at work. I'm retired, thank goodness also. But, people talk and then, everything, all opinions are up in the air and everything else. But until you have something written down that you can tear apart, you don't have anything. And I guess that's the other thing about the administrative part for me, is that from the August 14th meeting, watching the video, seemed to me that, well, this was going to happen and then tonight was going to happen and then 30 days from now or whatever it was, oh, bing, bang, boom, as the saying goes. So, I mean, wouldn't anything like this have a moratorium? I don't know. Which you said at the beginning of the meeting, and we're going to have an, moratorium. So, but I guess, again, from an administrative point of view, if that, could that have occurred at the August 14th meeting? That's all. I thought too, Rick Fritzen, and which everybody else has mentioned, Terry and Mike, and about the technology changing. Technology is changing like crazy. I think the one I always like to keep in my mind, I go to Pennsylvania to visit friends, and I still pass places that have the old satellite TVs, the ones that look like the moon, the big blue moon. So if we don't have a recycling plan, or we don't have anything like that, I mean, that's a great catch. You know, we end up with that possibly. So your aesthetics are hurting there, that's for sure. What else was there? I actually have more to say than Tarky, but I have it on microdot. Oh, well, so that would be the other thing, and I don't, again, I only look at it if I was Joe and Tarky. And I asked this question again, it doesn't need to be answered. Are they grandfathered in?
Yeah, we're not gonna come
Yes, we're
knocking
not-
on their door.
Okay, well, I didn't know that until just now. I mean, so I don't know if they knew it. Okay,
I wouldn't think that.
that's all I have. Oh, yeah, but you know I'll be watching it.
Thanks, Bob.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else with a comment or even a question for the board? Okay. Our next town board meeting will be on October 9th, Monday, October 9th at 7 p.m. And we will start off the town board meeting, well, before we have the town board meeting officially, we'll have another public hearing, and that'll be on the moratorium. So I don't know what else we're going to say besides what we said tonight, because we're kind of talking about everything. It's just a technicality that we have to have a public hearing because we're putting forth the moratorium. So
I think, I mean,
Go ahead.
not to interject, but I think there are concerns with the structure of the moratorium itself. And so, you know, I think, and I raised some of those concerns at the last meeting. And so I think that those.
the specifics of the moratorium.
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
right.
Not the concept of the
Right.
moratorium, but the implementation of
Right.
it. So,
Right.
so I mean, I think that those need to be brought out.
Right.
And we need to carefully weigh those because they may have some unanticipated consequences.
Okay. So anybody who's interested in that meeting is certainly welcome to come.
Is it gonna
Yes, ma'am.
start before the 7 o'clock
It's a
town
good-
board meeting at like 6:45?
That's a good question,
6:30?
Nancy.
It
It
Um,
says 7
It
o'clock.
says 7 o'clock. So
Okay.
we'll start the public hearing at 7, then we'll have
Okay.
the town board meeting right after that.
Okay.
So any other questions or comments for the board? Okay, so October 9th is the next time we get together and we will continue the discussion. And Al, you're going to stay on top of this, right? As far as, you know, a progression and evolution of working on this topic. And we have a committee that's working on it. It's not just Al, there's a committee that's working on this. So if everybody is okay with what we've discussed so far, then we can adjourn. Thank you for coming.
A question for you, Al.